Heather, I'm so excited to have you here today to dive in on all things venture building, venture capital. It's been so amazing to become friends during our times in New York and to see your journey in building human ventures, but also the amazing things you've contributed into the whole ecosystem, as well as your path around mindfulness. So you're such an inspiration to me. So glad to have you here. I'd love to just kick off with where are you based right now and what are you focused on these days?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love the ethos of your interviews and follow, I'm following incredible women here, so very honored. So I run a venture capital. I'm in New York City, run a venture capital fund called Human Ventures, and we invest the earliest stages of building, pre-seed, seed, and then we follow on until about the A round. And the categories and focuses that we look at, I call it the human needs economy. So we do think about your health, your wellness, your future, your livelihoods. The future of work is a big area for us. We've been diving into a category that we call experience and connection as well. And I think as we've experienced in the last couple of years, just so much more of what makes us human has to have, some technology enablement. And we've just learned a lot in work and being your whole person, your whole self. So those are some those categories that we're interested in.
I love that. I think more and more we're seeing this need to be investing in the whole spectrum of reality and, beyond just like sort of maybe the economic priorities, but also like the holistic ones. So I can't wait to dive into all those things. Obviously, you've built this great foundation as like a real professional investor, and we all get started somewhere. So I'm curious, what was your first ever investment? And you're also maybe your first ever venture capital investment?
Yeah. My father used to trade on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange in late 80s. And so I was exposed to investing early, all different types of investing. That's obviously more commodities that he was investing. But he did have me open up an E-Trade account when I was quite young, and I was researching, stocks to buy and would learn by doing. And there was this great platform called Thinkorswim, and you do paper trading as well. You could, put large amounts of capital towards this whole portfolio that was all fake money, right? And you just see how well you did. I always loved it, and that was on the obviously on the public side. Venture capital in general, I got exposed to pretty early. 2005, I was out in the Bay Area, and I knew I wanted to be around founders. And I happened to be working. I have a family friend who was working in this thing called venture, and so I was very lucky to be exposed early at this, incredible opportunity to give resources to founders to build and innovate. And that's really when I realized that private investing was something that I wanted to do. And fast forward 20 years later, and I'm so grateful to be doing that as my job.
Do you remember what your first venture capital investment was, or the first deal you looked at?
Yeah, because we started as what's called a startup studio, or as you're familiar with venture building, we raised capital in New York for a platform to help builders build, and we were investing in companies that we were building. So one earliest investment that we made in that vein was current.com. So it's a smart banking platform, digital bank now. It started as a smart debit card for teens. That's one that's still going strong and growing fast. So that was one of my first investments with Human. Prior to that, I was at a fund called CityLight Capital. And I think that's where we met when I was at CityLight with Josh Cohen and Matt Cohen, and we invested, and I helped build a company called Invest Forward, and it was a crowdfunding platform for impact investing. And it was early, it was before its time, both on the crowdfunding side and also on the impact side, but it really gave me a really good insight into the landscape of early stage investing, private investing in impact and mission driven areas.
It gives a good overview of what I usually ask next, which is like how you got started, how you ended up in this space, and maybe even like rewinding a little bit even before then. I know you did some incredible work with the David Lynch Foundation. That's where you really were starting to hone in on some of the transcendental meditation. And I think that did play a role in sort of the foundational thesis of Human. So I'd love to hear more about that story. Like, how did you get involved in that, and how did that transform where it took you?
Yeah. So when I was out in the Bay Area, I was working in venture, and then I also was um, volunteering for what was becoming the David Lynch Foundation. And I was a teacher. I am a teacher of Transcendental Meditation. I'm not practicing teacher right now. I I have a full-time job, so it was tough. But I started meditating with kids, and we did a couple of school projects in inner city schools in South San Francisco, and started to see such a significance of help with uh, kids who had ADD, ADHD, didn't wanted an alternative to medication, and so we started doing what was called quiet time, these programs, and just really saw schools transform with meditation in schools. And at the time, David Lynch, he asked Paul McCartney if he would do a concert to raise money for kids in schools and to teach them meditation. And Paul said yes. And so that was in 2009. And I'd never been to New York, or if I had, it was one or two times. But I was working with Bob Roth, who's the executive director of the David Lynch Foundation. He said, let's go do this. And we had 3 months to plan a Paul McCartney concert in New York. It was my entree into the city, and I really fell in love with it here. And so I stayed in the city, and then eventually found my way back into investing. But it really, David Lynch Foundation opened up an incredible network in New York. I think philanthropy is amazing in that way, where you have a cross section of all these really smart people in all these different industries. And some of our largest donors were, had these family offices, and I started working with them too in investing. So it was a nice entree into that.
I love that, how you can kind of go back through time and be like, these little decisions are the ones that sort of build up to the reason we invest our time the way we do, the kinds of things and networks that expand that you can't always plan for. It sort of just organically happens, even just you being in New York now because of that, which I think is so special. So thanks for sharing that. So what role do you feel like you're playing now in the wealth space? When you think about the founders in your portfolio, the LPs, just your whole network, what is the role you're playing in the wealth space, and why do you think it's important?
Well, I mean, traditionally, decision makers in venture capital have mostly been men, and they've mostly been a subset of men. I think there's some stat of 70% of decision makers in investing come from either Harvard or Stanford. I think it's a very narrow set of people who have been investing for a long time. And over the past 5 years, and since I started Human, I think we've seen that landscape change quite a bit. It's still slow going because these investments take time to show, that you were right and that you were early. But I think it's really important to have different lenses on what value is being created with these businesses. So, if you have a certain set of experiences and background, you're going to see value in different things. And I think right now there's a massive opportunity for wealth creation by having a different lens on these companies. It is the arbitrage, right? If you have a different lens on what founders should be founding companies, or what categories and areas should be, invested in. I'll give you an example. We were early investors in a company called Tia Health, and at the time it was people were kind of looking at women's health as very niche, like it can't be big enough, it can't be a big enough market. And then I sat there and started thinking about just seeing what Carolyn Whitty, the founder, she was seeing 500,000 women, and they just didn't have a place to go for gynecology, or a lot of these women's issues relating to health. And so she's now kind of, I call it the One Medical for women's health, but she really is investing in the whole women care, and have many clinics across the country, and just a massive business. And so I think if I didn't have the same lens of all the issues and challenges that women have that are different to just standard of care, I might not have understood that opportunity.
Yeah, it's such an important thing. As you've been looking at things with such a different lens and your own unique perspective, what do you think has been the most exciting thing that you've learned that you would want others to know, especially when you're thinking about evaluating opportunities that might come forward?
I think one thing is that it takes 10 years to really build a market around one of the big companies that you see. Everyone always says, oh, overnight success takes 10 years, but it really, It really does. When the market is emerging and you see it and it seems very nascent, it really will be 10 years before that's the exit environment's going to be ripe for that company. And so I think finding founders who see and build for a world 10 years from now is a unique skill set, but it's also an exciting one because you get to hear kind of futurists, pitch their kind of idea of, and you almost see founders that really do see the world 10 years, like they're frustrated with the world not being there yet, and so I love that. I like to say that I can kind of spot founders who can do that. So I can be a little bit more of a bridge, right? But my dad was a serial entrepreneur and he always saw 10 years out. And so I can spot those types of people. I have a lot of respect for them because it's not an easy thing to do.
Are there any characteristics, maybe like 1, 2, 3 characteristics that you feel are indicative of sort of that futurist founder, things that you notice?
It's a great question. I just was at South by Southwest and we did a panel on founders of the future and what qualities that leadership should have, going into the next 10 years. And I think those qualities probably look very different than the qualities of the last 20 years of founders. It's just things have changed, right? No longer is it just only 22-year-old CS majors can write code. Now, tech is everywhere. And so what are some of those qualities? I think in the founders that we look for, I think it's a combination of confidence, but humility that things are always going to change. You can't plan for anything. It's not going to go as planned. So, we definitely look for people who have resilience and can lead through really tumultuous times. Just in the last 3 years, some of our founders, pandemic, George Floyd, Silicon Valley Bank crashing, like it's just like you never know what's going to happen. So I think building up that resilience is really, really important. And you can see indicators of that from people, in their background and how they built.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully there's not as many things ongoing next 3 years, but resilience, I'll take resilience for sure. Is there a founder or a company right now that's really inspiring you in that either seeing ahead into the future or those qualities that you mentioned of resilience?
There are a ton. I think Carolyn Whitty's one that she's really constantly inspiring me with how fast she builds, and she's doing, she has big contracts with medical providers. She's got physical clinics. I mean, just watching her, she's customer obsessed product designer too. So she's always thinking about how that product is being received by her customer. Another woman who I'm very inspired by is a woman named Paige Finn Doherty. She's a young up and coming VC who has raised now 2 funds. I'm a small LP in both of her funds because I just love to see the next generation of venture capitalists just go do it. I think, I wish I had that ability to do that when I was in my early 20s. It was a very different landscape. And so I'm just rooting for, new investors in the space, women who have different lenses, and she's a great one.
I love that. We'll definitely be tagging them in the transcript so everyone watching can look up both of those visionaries. So what advice would you give to somebody getting started, either maybe on your own venture capital portfolio as an LP to start, and then potentially even as a new fund manager?
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting time right now because there are opportunities for people to start funds. Traditionally it was harder to do that. Now there are programs to help you kind of get off the ground. There's now capital sources that are looking at the emerging manager space. So emerging managers just defined as, the first couple of funds vintages. And, the capital allocation kind of mechanism wasn't really there for that for a long time. Funds under $100 million or kind of new managers that hadn't spun out of the top tier firms. But now there's a very different ecosystem where if you really do see a unique opportunity and you have a network that is unlike anyone else's, and you have the ability to kind of capitalize on that, you can make a strong case for starting your own fund. I think that's very exciting. I also think that having family offices in the ecosystem participate more and more in venture capital has definitely helped. increase, the ability for smaller funds to exist in the market. So, I mean, advice that I would give folks, I think, if you don't know yet where you want to sit into the ecosystem, see what companies you love and see who were the early investors in them, because clearly you have some alignment in where you think value is being created and what brands are being, amazing. And then, I think try to make yourself useful or valuable to one of those funds. I mean, oftentimes, teams are small, so it's hard to get, find people who are hiring, but people are, and then, understanding kind of their network and how you can add value is really important. I also say that if you can learn being on the LP side, on the limited partner side, so people who invest in funds or work with them and understand that, I think that's a really good way to understand the venture landscape there too. So it's kind of an under-touted way of getting into the industry, or the people side, right? So recruiting, and in that way too. I think that's a really good way to add value and get in. And then also investor relations becoming more and more, in demand and such a valuable skill. So understanding the flow of capital and being able to really talk to the way funds work, I think that's a really valuable entry point as well.
I love that. And especially just even comparing the last few years, the tool set has become so expanded, right? When we think about Carta and AngelList, just basically like their fund products have become really, really simplified and accessible kind of to everyone. So it's really interesting. It becomes that unique lens, that unique point of view, the unique access points that really make all the difference. Are there any other piece of advice you would give to maybe an LP or other sort of investors looking to invest in an emerging manager or in a fund, or get started in that way as they're thinking about the who and the what to prioritize?
Yeah, I think there are some really incredible programs for emerging managers right now, and I would start there of who's kind of break out from those ones called Cool Water Capital, which is kind of like a Y Combinator for emerging fund managers, and Wintermead, who runs that, really does an excellent job curating the managers that he brings into his cohorts. And so if you're starting your LP program in a family office or at an earlier endowment or something like that, that I think there are ways to kind of see that. I'm also part of something called the Kauffman Fellows. So the Kauffman Fellows are an excellent way to tap into a very powerful network. And when you're backing a manager who's been in the fellowship program, then you kind of get this big amplifier community effect with it as well. So I would encourage people to kind of look at those different programs that fund managers elect to be a part of.
Brilliant. And so what's coming next for you? How can we follow along both on your personal journey and then also with Human Ventures?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very active online. I don't post as much now on Twitter, but LinkedIn is always one that I'm very much. I think it's a very powerful resource. So encourage you to connect with me there. And then we do something called Humans in the Wild, which is our entrepreneur in residence program. So in next quarter, we'll probably launch another version of Humans in the Wild. So we'll be putting out a call for founders who are building, and we love meeting new founders. So that's something to keep on your radar.
I love that. Well, we will definitely be following along. And thank you so much for everything you're doing in the ecosystem. You really were on the cutting edge and the visionary edge of setting up Human. And I'm such a fan of what you're building and the portfolio of companies that you're supporting. So thanks so much for everything that you're doing and for what you've shared. And we'll definitely be following.
Thank you for having me.